There are 5 ways in which the reasons the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society gives Jehovah's Witnesses for their prohibition of birthday celebrations fall flat. However, there's one real reason that I believe that Watchtower prohibits Jehovah's Witnesses from celebrating birthdays. You ready to hear it? Let's get into it. Up until the 1950s, Jehovah's Witnesses did actually celebrate birthdays. It was in some of their literature. It showed that they were actively celebrating birthdays, getting gifts, receiving gifts, that kind of thing, until the fateful day in October of 1951 in the Watchtower, a change in their doctrine came about when they said, quote, "Such celebrations have their roots in pagan religions and not scriptural grounds." Some Bible commentators suggest that birthday celebrations may have had their origin in the notion of the immortality of the soul. And now, today, Watchtower forbids the celebration of birthdays for Jehovah's Witnesses. But whatever your thoughts on birthdays are, whether you think they should or should not be celebrated by Christians, the Watchtower's rationale for prohibiting them is clearly erroneous. And in this video, we'll discuss 5 reasons why that's true. Number 1, what Watchtower itself says about customs and practices previously considered pagan reveals their standard to be hypocritical. 2, how Watchtower uses an erroneous application of scriptures to indicate God doesn't want Jehovah's Witnesses to celebrate birthdays. 3, how applying Watchtower's logic to other things that Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to do reveals the flaws in the birthday prohibition. 4, how Watchtower's allowing other types of individual celebrations shows that they're hinting at birthday celebrations being idolatrous is both duplicitous and hypocritical. And 5, what the New Testament says about Christian freedom makes clear that Watchtower should stop such baseless mandates based only on their own opinion rather than direct scriptural prohibition. After we discuss those 5 points, like I said, I'm going to tell you what I believe the real reason for Watchtower's prohibition of birthday celebrations is. You may not have thought about it before. But first, an announcement. If you're watching this video within the first couple of hours of it being released, you may have noticed that there weren't any ads. Isn't that wonderful? Ads are so annoying. I do not like them. I don't think anybody does. But unfortunately, they pay the bills. So what I was thinking I could do is if I could get enough people to join the channel by clicking the join button below and becoming a member of the channel, then I could turn off the ads. So if I get enough people to join the membership, each time I put out a new video, I'm just going to keep that video completely ad-free. And once I get enough people to where I don't have to worry about YouTube showing ads at all, I'm just going to keep ads off the channel entirely, which I know you would probably prefer. I would certainly prefer. And it would also help the information get out to people better because they wouldn't get annoyed by having to see ads and maybe stop watching because of it. So if you are willing and able to show me some support by clicking join, I very much appreciate it. So thank you in advance. All right, on to the good stuff. First, what Watchtower says about customs and practices previously considered pagan reveals their stand to be hypocritical. Let me read you a portion of the January 8, 2000 Awake article, A Balanced View of Popular Customs, and see if it doesn't immediately jump out at you how Watchtower is being hypocritical here. The Concern of Christians is the title of the subheading. When a Christian must decide whether or not to follow a certain custom, his main concern should be, what is God's viewpoint as expressed in the Bible? In the past, God condemned certain practices that may have been tolerated in some communities. These included child sacrifice, the misuse of blood, and various sexual practices. Likewise, certain customs that are common today are clearly not in harmony with Bible principles. Among these are non-biblical traditions connected with religious holidays such as Christmas and Easter, or with superstitious practices related to Spiritism. But what about customs that may once have been linked to questionable practices, but that today are primarily viewed as social etiquette? For example, many popular wedding customs, including the exchanging of rings and the eating of cake, may have pagan origins. Does this mean that Christians are forbidden to observe such customs? Are Christians required to scrutinize meticulously every custom of the community to see whether someone or at some time it had negative connotations? Paul points out that where the Spirit of Jehovah is, there is freedom. God wants us to use this freedom, not as an inducement for selfish cravings, but to train our perceptive powers to distinguish right from wrong. Hence, in a matter where there is no clear violation of Bible principles, Jehovah's Witnesses do not create a hard and fast rule. Instead, each Christian must weigh the circumstances at hand and make a personal decision. Do you see the flagrant hypocrisy, the double standard going on here? When it comes to weddings, the exchanging of rings and the eating of cake, both of which have pagan origins that are undeniable, but both of which nobody thinks anything of today, it's not linked to any false worship. There's no worship going on here at all. There's no idolatry involved. It's just rings and a cake. The rings have come to have a different meaning for people today. The cake has a different meaning for people today. Nobody views it as pagan. So the Watchtower says, we don't have to scrutinize this. We don't have to look and see if each custom of the community somewhere at some time had some negative connotations. But isn't that exactly what they're doing with birthdays? Watchtower claims that the Bible does not cast birthdays in a good light. We'll get into that in a minute, though. But even if that's true, and even if at some time when the first century Christians did not celebrate birthdays because they had false worship and idolatrous practices involved in them, does anybody do any of that today? Is there any worship of Molech going on today when someone's eating a piece of cake and blowing out the candles? No, that's not happening. And if you don't like the blowing out the candles thing, fine, don't do that. Why does Watchtower still prohibit birthdays completely, even though no one views it in that way, in the same way they don't view the rings at a wedding or the cake at a wedding feast as being pagan? But they do. They do not apply this standard across the board. They're picking and choosing what they apply it to, and that makes it completely erroneous and hypocritical. Let me give you another reference of Watchtower from the September 2023 Watchtower, Let Mildness Be Your Strength. Notice what it says here. Here, Watchtower admits in their own way, using the language they use, that the Bible does not prohibit birthday celebrations. If a workmate asks, for example, why we do not celebrate holidays, consider, could he be wondering whether we're allowed to have a good time? Or might he feel that our position will dampen the company's team spirit? May we be able to ease our workmate's concerns by expressing how much we appreciate his interest in fellow workers and assuring him that we want to enjoy a pleasant environment at work. That might open the way to a relaxed conversation about what the Bible indicates regarding the subject of birthdays. Now, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or if you were for a very, very long time, you know what the word indicates means when you see it in one of Watchtower's publications. Indicates means it doesn't say that, but we think it's true, so you have to do it. That's called eisegesis, the erroneous imbuing of meaning into a text where there is none. And we'll get into how they do that in just a second here. Watchtower never actually quotes any scripture that directly forbids birthday celebrations. They can't, because those scriptures don't exist. They have to infer things from other texts and claim that's what it means. But that's not what the Bible says. That's just their opinion on it. The Bible does not condemn or condone birthdays. Even if Watchtower is correct, however, in stating that the first century Christians didn't celebrate birthdays, their own reasoning for why it's okay to exchange wedding rings and eat cake at weddings, because nobody views it as pagan anymore, nobody does those things anymore, that should apply to birthdays. Why doesn't it? Good question. Point 2. How Watchtower uses an erroneous application of scriptures to indicate God doesn't want Jehovah's Witnesses to celebrate birthdays. JW.org's Enjoy Life Forever interactive Bible course under the topic, Do All Celebrations Please God? Says this. For example, have you ever wondered what God thinks of birthday celebrations? The Bible never refers to a worshiper of Jehovah celebrating a birthday, but it does record 2 birthdays celebrated by people who did not serve him. Read Genesis 40, 20 through 22 and Matthew 14, 6 through 10. Then discuss these questions. What do both birthday celebrations have in common? Based on these Bible accounts, how do you think Jehovah feels about birthdays? Well, let's do that, shall we? First, let's read Genesis 40, 20 through 22. And see what it says. It says, Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a feast for all his servants. And he brought out both the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his servants. And he returned the chief cupbearer to his post of cupbearer, and he continued to hand the cup to Pharaoh. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. So, in answer to the question, based on this account, how do you think Jehovah feels about birthdays? Well, it doesn't say anything about how Jehovah feels about birthdays. It just said what happened at a birthday. So we can't know how Jehovah feels about the celebration of birthdays based on that first account. But maybe the second one has something where it tells us what Jehovah thinks about birthdays. So let's read that one. Matthew 14, 6 through 10. But when Herod's birthday was being celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced for the occasion and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Then she, at her mother's prompting, said, Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. Grieved though he was, the king, out of regard for his oaths and for those dining with him, commanded it to be given. So he sent and had John beheaded in the prison. So again, based on this Bible account, how do you think Jehovah feels about birthdays? I don't know. It doesn't say anything about what Jehovah thinks about birthdays. It said that at a birthday, John the Baptist was beheaded and Herod was grieved about it, but he felt obligated. It doesn't say anything about the birthday. In fact, the account doesn't seem to really be about a birthday at all. It's about the execution of John the Baptist. And just like the first one, wasn't really about a birthday. It just happened at a birthday that Pharaoh hanged the chief baker. So how do we know what Jehovah thinks about birthdays based on these 2 passages that say nothing about how Jehovah feels about birthdays? We don't know, because it doesn't say anything about that. So that's how Watchtower erroneously uses passages in the Bible to try to make you think they mean something they don't. Birthdays happen to be in those scriptures, but it's not about the birthdays, and it doesn't say anything about how Jehovah felt about the birthdays. Therefore, we cannot draw any conclusions about how God feels about birthdays based on those passages. After that, in that same Bible course, Do All Celebrations Please God, it says, Still you may wonder, does Jehovah really care whether I participate in a birthday or other unscriptural celebration? Read Exodus 32, 1 through 8. Well, we're not going to read that whole passage here, but I suggest you go do so and see that it too doesn't say anything about birthdays. That's where when Moses was coming down off Mount Sinai after having been given the 10 Commandments, the people had made a false god, a golden calf, and were worshiping it, saying it was in celebration of Jehovah. It was a festival to Jehovah, and Jehovah was mad about it, and death ensued, and so on. But it doesn't say anything about birthdays. It wasn't a birthday celebration. They made a false god, a golden calf. So what can we learn about Jehovah's view of birthdays from Exodus 32, 1 through 8? Absolutely nothing, because it says nothing about birthdays. Again, this is called eisegesis. This is Watchtower imbuing meaning into scriptures that are not there. However, there is one passage that Watchtower's Bible, the New World Translation, masks so you don't know it's talking about a birthday, where God's servant, or at least his kids, celebrated their birthdays. In Job 1, verse 4 and 5, Job's son are celebrating their birthdays. The New World Translation doesn't call it a birthday. It just calls it their own day. But if you read other translations, many of them do use the word birthday. But again, to be fair, that doesn't tell us anything about what Jehovah thinks about birthdays either. It just said that Job's sons celebrated birthdays. Now, Job wasn't against this. He clearly didn't have a problem with it. But you can't say that there were no birthday celebrations in the Bible that were positive, because Job's sons did celebrate their birthdays, and it is put not in a negative light. So there you go. Point 3. How applying Watchtower's logic to other things that Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to do reveals the flaws in the birthday prohibition. Let's talk about the Bible and dogs. The Bible overwhelmingly speaks of dogs in a negative light. Let's give you some examples. Philippians 3:2 says, "Look out for the dogs. Look out for those who cause injury. Look out for those who mutilate the flesh." Revelation 22:15 says, "Outside are the dogs and those who practice spiritism and those who are sexually immoral and the murderers and the idolaters and everyone who loves and practices lying." Matthew 7:6, "Do not give what is holy to dogs." Psalms 22:16, "For dogs surround me, they close in on me like a pack of evildoers, like a lion, they are at my hands and feet." Dogs meet the same two criteria that Watchtower uses to try to tell Jehovah's Witnesses they can't celebrate birthdays. First, the first century Christians did not keep dogs as pets. They were not domesticated animals at that time. And two, the Bible casts dogs in an overwhelmingly negative light. Are Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to keep dogs? Yes, they are. Why the double standard? Let me give you another example. Cats. Cats were even worse than dogs. First of all, cats were worshipped as gods in Egypt. So right off the bat, that makes them really bad when it comes to the view of Watchtower in the Bible, because they were pagan gods. Cats are never spoken of favorably in the Bible. First century Christians did not keep cats as pets, and under the Mosaic law, according to Leviticus chapter 11, cats are unclean animals, and here's why. Leviticus 11 states that land animals that chew the cud and have a divided hoof are considered clean and therefore fit for consumption. Cats, however, are carnivorous animals, and they don't chew the cud or have divided hooves, and therefore they would fall under the unclean category. So, based on all those things, Jehovah's Witnesses should not keep cats as pets. Do Jehovah's Witnesses keep cats as pets? Yes, they do. When viewed in this way, you can see that combining that with what the Watchtower itself says about practices no longer viewed as pagan being okay, the prohibition on birthday celebrations is clearly ridiculous. There's so many things that the Watchtower says is fine for Jehovah's Witnesses to do that either are not mentioned in the Bible, aren't mentioned in a good light, but that just isn't how people look at things today. For example, the way the first century Christians would have dressed in robes. Does that mean it's wrong to not wear robes just because the first century Christians only wore robes? Well, no. The style is just different now. First century Christians didn't have churches. They didn't have kingdom halls. They didn't meet in buildings. They met in homes, in each other's homes. Does that mean it's wrong for Jehovah's Witnesses to meet in kingdom halls? Well, no, it doesn't. It just wasn't done that way back then. So unless there's some explicit Bible principle that's being violated by a thing, Watchtower cannot claim that Jehovah's Witnesses should not do that thing based on biblical principles. There is no biblical scripture, no principle being violated by the celebrating of a birthday, and therefore Watchtower has no business getting up in Jehovah's Witnesses' grill and telling them that they can't celebrate birthdays. Now, if the individual witness does not feel it would be appropriate to celebrate a birthday, well, that's their call. They have the right to do that under their Christian freedom, which we'll get to in a minute. But Watchtower should not be making rules for them when they don't violate any kind of biblical principles. All right, next point. How Watchtower is allowing other types of individual celebrations shows that they're hinting at birthday celebrations being idolatrous is duplicitous and hypocritical. First of all, my entire life as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, that was always stated, that birthdays were a form of idolatry. Now, to be fair, Watchtower never clearly says it in print, but they do hint at it quite a bit. An example of that is in the Reasoning from the Scriptures book under the subheading of birthdays. It says, the later Hebrews looked on the celebration of birthdays as part of idolatrous worship, a view which would be abundantly confirmed by what they saw of the common observances associated with these days. And that's from the Imperial Bible Dictionary of London, 1874. So by saying that, by referencing that book, Watchtower is implying that modern day birthday celebrations are idolatrous. But the problem with that is that they're not. In order for something to be idolatrous, you have to be worshiping an idol. And that was the case in the Roman and Greek birthdays of the ancient times, but that's not true now. There's no idols involved in eating cake and giving gifts and having a good time and drinking way too much punch. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing idolatrous about that. So the connection doesn't jive. But Watchtower tries to imply that even today, celebrating your birthday is idolatrous. But hang on. Putting aside for the moment the fact that no false gods are worshipped in modern birthday celebrations, thus removing them from being part of idolatrous worship, the only thing Watchtower can claim makes the practice of birthday celebrations idolatrous is that it draws attention to a single individual who's being honored at the celebration. But hold on. Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate birthday showers. They do that fine. Isn't that honoring one person, either the mother or the baby, or maybe both? Isn't that honoring one person over everyone else in that moment? Well, yeah, it is. Wedding showers, same thing. Weddings themselves honor the individuals. And Jesus attended one of those, so clearly he didn't have a problem with that. Anniversaries are very much the same. And I remember my time as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, we had some big anniversary parties. Back when we had a presiding overseer instead of a Kobe, he and his wife hit their 50-year anniversary, and there was a huge celebration. The entire congregation was there. Probably 100 people were there. It was a big deal. Why was that okay? Graduation celebrations, same thing. Somebody graduates and they throw a big party for them, and not just graduating from like high school, but also if someone goes through Gilead or if they go to Bethel or receive any kind of special privilege like that, we would always throw them a party either after they got back or before they left, or sometimes both. We had housewarming parties, totally fine, even though that honored one individual. So if you're going to claim that a birthday is idolatrous because it elevates one person in the celebration, well, so is everything else that Watchtower allows Jehovah's Witnesses to do. And again, there's no scriptural prohibition for either birthdays or any of the other things that witnesses do. So why does Watchtower make rules? I'll get to that. We're getting there. Last point. What the New Testament says about Christian freedom indicates that Watchtower should stop their baseless mandates based on their own opinions rather than direct scriptural prohibition. Let's read a few scriptures on Christian freedom. Romans 14, 5, 6, and 10. One man judges one day as above another. Another judges one day the same as all others. Let each one be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it to Jehovah. Also, the one who eats, eats to Jehovah, for he gives thanks to God. And the one who does not eat to Jehovah, and yet gives thanks to God. But why do you judge your brother? Or why do you also look down on your brother? For we all stand before the judgment seat of God. So clearly, Paul was fine with holding one day above another or not. And he was fine with observations of these events. And then he says, don't judge your brother about what he does. So as long as people are having a birthday celebration that does not violate some other Christian principles, who is Watchtower to judge Jehovah's Witnesses for choosing to do that? They have Christian freedom. You leave them alone. But Watchtower doesn't leave them alone. They're very heavy-handed about these things. Then there's Galatians 5:1. For such freedom Christ set us free. Therefore, stand firm and do not let yourselves be confined again in a yoke of slavery. Christian freedom. Get out of a yoke of slavery. Here, Paul is saying that the prior law was a yoke of slavery. You were attached to all these rules and regulations. That wasn't supposed to be the way it was anymore. Jesus got rid of that, as we'll see in just a second. And so why does Watchtower continue to make rules and put Jehovah's Witnesses under a yoke of slavery? They shouldn't. 2 Corinthians 3:17. Now Jehovah is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of Jehovah is, there is freedom. And finally, James 1:25 says that the perfect law belongs to freedom. So making all these rules, especially these rules that prohibit something that the Bible does not prohibit, is way out of line for Watchtower. They have no business meddling in people's Christian freedom, and yet that's exactly what they do. Now, let's talk about the yoke of slavery here for a second. Again, there in Galatians 5:1, Paul said, "Do not let yourselves be confined again in a yoke of slavery." Well, let me describe to you the Watchtower's yoke of slavery. They have a book. It's the Elders' Rule Book. It's called Shepherd the Flock of God. The most current edition from October of 2023 is 290 pages long and contains about 70,000 words of rules for elders and Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, 70,000 words of rules that they enforce in the congregation. If you add up the entire books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where the Mosaic Law Code is contained, plus a whole bunch of other narratives, you don't reach 70,000 words. You heard that right. The Shepherd the Flock of God rule book contains more rules than 3 books of the Bible combined that contain the entire law code. What does that tell you about how Watchtower views Jehovah's Witnesses' Christian freedom? They clearly don't respect it at all. They have created their own yoke of slavery. Colossians 2:14 says that the law was nailed to the cross or to the torture stake, according to the New World Translation. Well, that may be true, but the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society clearly created another law code that Jehovah's Witnesses are now supposed to follow. Does that sound very Christian to you? Does that reflect all the scriptures on Christian freedom that we just read? No, it doesn't. All of these kinds of things need to be left to a Christian's individual conscience. You don't have to agree. You don't have to approve. You personally can make your own decisions about whether or not you want to associate with someone who chooses to do those things. But it is not your place to tell all other Christians how they should behave and act, especially when you have zero scriptural support for your claims. All you have is eisegesis. All you have is your opinion on what those things mean. Now let's read one more scriptural passage, this time Jesus himself. Matthew 20:25 through 28. Tell me if Watchtower's 70,000 words, 290 pages of laws and rules that they enforce in the congregation reflects what Jesus says here. Matthew 20:25 through 28. But Jesus called to him and said, "You know that rulers of the nations lord it over them, and the great men wield authority over them. This must not be the way among you, but whoever wants to become great among you must be your minister. And whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom, an exchange for many." Do Watchtower's rules fit in with not lording it over people? Clearly not. And that brings me to the last point I want to make. My opinion, keep in mind this is my opinion, having been one of Jehovah's Witnesses for 40 years, on why the Watchtower actually prohibits birthday celebrations. Think about this. If Jehovah's Witnesses celebrated birthdays, let's say the congregation has 100 people in it. That's 100 birthdays a year. Imagine the cake, imagine the gifts, imagine the time, the energy, the money, the expenditure it would take for the congregation to be celebrating each other's birthday. Where would Watchtower rather have you pour all your time, energy, and money? Into Watchtower. So clearly anything that goes against that, they don't want you to do it. Don't celebrate birthdays. Don't buy other people gifts. Put your money in the contribution box. Don't spend time organizing birthday parties for everyone in the congregation so they can feel good about themselves and have a good time and maybe get something nice from somebody. Give it to the Watchtower. Put all your energy into Watchtower. Go out in service. Man a cart. Build a kingdom hall. Do something like that. If you take this same kind of reasoning and apply it to all of the things that Watchtower prohibits, you will very often find that there's a big benefit to the Watchtower if they prohibit you from doing it. Christmas is another one. Again, I'm not saying you should think that Christmas is something Christians should do. I'm just saying I do not believe for 1 second that Watchtower has a pure motive when they write all these Pharisaical rules that violate Christian freedom and try to force Jehovah's Witnesses to abide by them through their strong-handed act of shunning and soft shunning and otherwise looking down on people and revoking privileges if they don't do what they're told. They don't have a pure motive for doing these things, not in my experience. They want you to focus on them. They want you to serve them. They want you to give your money to them, not to these other things, and certainly not to yourself. So that's why I think Watchtower actually prohibits Jehovah's Witnesses from celebrating birthdays, even though they have no scriptural support for this at all. And it's wildly hypocritical that they do so because they do allow other kinds of celebrations that used to have pagan meaning and today do not. In their own literature it says, like the using of wedding rings and the eating of cake at wedding receptions. That's what I think, but I'd love to know what you think. So please leave your comments and your thoughts below. And again, remember, I'm trying to prevent ads on my channel. So if you have the willingness and are able to help me out by joining the channel, clicking the join button, I'd greatly appreciate it. But if not, don't sweat it. I'm still going to be here making videos. Love you guys. Take care.